Significant gas reserves buried deep beneath these hills.
Premier's interested in exploring in this part of Pakistan, basically because we believe it's very prospective for gas reserves. And right now we're sitting on the eastern boundary of our exploration concession. And these white rocks underneath me here, these are limestones. And in the background over here, you can see some big cliffs of red rocks, and these are sandstones. And the thing that's important about these is that these are porous rocks and they can store gas underground. This is a rather unique location here because these sandstones are at surface close to where we sit. And what's happened is that they've been brought to surface along a large thrust fault that's right on the edge of our exploration concession. And we know that on the other side of this cliff here, these sandstones dip back underground, and underneath the Kirthar hills behind us, the sandstones here are about 2,000 to 3,000 meters underground. This sandstone is prospective for gas because it's highly porous. That means there are pore spaces between the sand grains in this rock, and I can feel that this is a very porous rock because it's light. When I'm hefting this in my hand, it's a really light rock. It feels like a sponge. Okay, so it's full of spaces, and these spaces contain air right here on the surface. So it's these same spaces between the grains of sand in this rock that can contain gas in the subsurface. And the gas is kept in place by layers of shale which sit above the sandstone underground.
A major problem for Premier Oil when searching for these gas-filled rocks is that an important part of the Dunbar concession lies within the boundaries of the Kirthar National Park. It also includes a wildlife sanctuary and a game reserve. Kirthar was the first of Pakistan's 4 national parks to be included in the United Nations Register of Parks in 1975. It's an internationally important region which has statutory protection. And this is one of the reasons for the park's status. It's the Sindh ibex, an intensely shy animal. Once almost extinct here, they now flourish on the steep slopes of the Kirthar hills. Along with ibex, Kirthar is home to wild sheep, chinkara gazelles, wolves and hyenas, as well as many small mammals, reptiles and birds. There is also a scattered population of indigenous people in the park who make a subsistence living with sheep, goats and cattle. The park is managed by the Sindh Wildlife Department, who, along with non-governmental organizations such as the World Wildlife Fund for Nature and the IUCN, are concerned at the possible effects of any exploration.
There is no doubt that exploring in any national park in any part of the world is a very controversial issue. The general public, NGOs, government bodies perceive sometimes the way we do our work as a risk. And I think that we have to convince people who are naturally concerned that we can behave as a mature citizen.
One of the people Premier Oil had to convince is the landowner of an important part of their concession. For 30 years he has worked to bring the ibex back from near extinction, and he would not tolerate any new threat to the wildlife.
मैं शुक्रगुजार हूँ अपने कौम कबीले के लोगों का कि इन्होंने मुकम्मल मेरा इसमें साथ दिया, न बल्कि उन्होंने खुद शिकार को रोका, बल्कि पूरी उन्होंने मेहनत की और उनका बड़ा कंट्रीब्यूशन है, बल्कि हर शिकार करने वालों को उन्होंने रोका है, पकड़ा है और नहीं छोड़ा है। इसी वजह से और उन्होंने उनको इस तरह बचाया है जिस तरह के अपने उस भेड़ बकरी अपना माल मवेशी से भी ज़्यादा इनको प्यार करके बचाया, और यही वजह है कि आज सैकड़ों जानवर हैं। और इस वक्त मैं कह सकता हूँ कि आईबैक्स मेरे पास 500 से भी ज़्यादा हों।
One of the conditions of Premier's license is that the company carries out an environmental impact assessment. This EIA must then be approved by the Sindh Environmental Protection Agency before any exploration can begin in the national park. An independent firm of environmental consultants has been commissioned to carry out field studies outside the park and the EIA inside its boundaries. They have brought in experts from Pakistan and around the world, specialists in zoology, botany and ecology.
It's quite interesting. We thought that we could practically let them go in everywhere, but John was saying at certain times of the year, he may not even like the cables being, laid over there.
Do we know now what those times of the year are?
Oh, they're going to be breeding times, kidding seasons for the ibex, for example. If they have cliffs where they traditionally keep their kids and use as escape terrain, those are areas that would be extremely sensitive to any kind of disturbance. So we'd want to identify those areas and let you know about those well in advance.
Yeah.
So you'd need to allow time in the morning or evening for animals to travel through those areas.
Right.
One of the most potentially disturbing exploration activities is the seismic survey. This is vital to establish where the gas reserves may lie, more than 2 kilometers beneath the surface. In the neighboring concession to Premier's and outside the park boundaries, another oil company is working on their seismic lines.
What we need to do to find out where to drill is to understand the structure of the rocks below the surface. And the seismic crew will set up a long line, maybe 10 kilometers in length, and they will let off small charges along the length of the line at about 50-meter intervals. Sound waves from those shots will travel down through the earth and then return to surface when they're reflected off subterranean rock layers. And so those sound waves are recorded on geophones, which are also situated in groups along the seismic line. And from those we do some computer processing, and we can process a cross-section through the earth to see what the deep structure is.
The disturbance to the environment that the seismic surveys may cause is one of the biggest problems in the whole exploration process. One of the consultants brought in to analyze this threat is ecologist Dr. John Gross, who is also a leading expert on ibex.
I've just spotted a large group of male ibex that are feeding in the early morning up on the ridge. It looks like a group of somewhere between 25 and 40 animals, mostly mature males. The terrain here is really good for ibex in that it's got some flattish areas that have shrubs and the foods that they eat, shrubs and grasses and whatnot, but it's also very close to escape terrain, that there's mountainside drops off steeply on the other side, and so that provides them with an area that they can quickly run to and escape from predators. So for ibex, this is really excellent habitat. The role that I have is to look at what kind of wildlife, first off, survey the areas and find out what sorts of species live in these areas and identify those that might be impacted by seismic explorations, and then to try and figure out which areas we might, for example, prohibit any activity in or limit the kinds of activities that can go on so that we disturb the animals as little as possible.
If Premier Oil get the go-ahead to begin exploration, they will use the same equipment and techniques as in the neighboring concession to carry out their seismic survey. In order to keep disturbance to an absolute minimum, the working conditions imposed upon the seismic contractor will be extremely stringent and governed by an environmental management plan. All the equipment will be taken to the lines by camels. No new roads will be built, and no wheeled vehicles will leave existing tracks. No hunting will be allowed, and no trees will be cut. A typical 10-kilometer seismic line takes 3 days to drill. The shot holes will be drilled by hand. The routes of all seismic lines will have been approved by the environmental consultants and the Sindh Wildlife Department. This is the noisiest part of the process, but John Gross believes its effects on the wildlife will be short-lived.
Well, it's a bit noisy and dusty, but in terms of impacts on the animals, it's consistent and loud enough sort of a disturbance that the animals can hear it from quite a distance, and I think they'll respond to it, probably come over and take a look and then move away, you know, during the day, but it's not something that's likely to frighten them. It looks to me that the biggest impacts here are probably the number of people and getting people in and out of the site, which is quite disruptive and a little less predictable than, you know, the operation that's going on in one place like this.
The drill holes will only be 1.5 meters deep, with a very small charge, 250 grams of explosive, in each hole.
Okay, connected.
Recording the entire line takes about 2 days. After firing, a pickup crew will travel along every line, removing all equipment and materials and ensuring that no trace remains that the seismic work has been carried out there. However, no seismic work will take place until the environmental impact assessment has been approved. And Premier Oil will only carry out the EIA within the park with the full cooperation of the Sindh Wildlife Department. Outside the national park, Premier Oil is committed to the same high standards. The boundaries of the park may be clear on a map, but in the field, the terrain is exactly the same, and so are the environmental issues.
The national park, so the area south.
So now the company is working with its consultants and the Sindh Wildlife Department in parts of the concession area outside the park to develop its program of environmental assessment.
Hi.
So, see anything interesting this morning?
Yeah, actually we did. We ran across a group of about 24 ibex back over the hillside. It's probably within the last hour. One of the questions that I would want to speak with Jamali and the local game guards is to find out if there were other water holes down here. For example, if you're running a seismic line, you wouldn't want to put that line between the water and ranges that the animals use a lot and have activity there consistently. If you'd want to restrict the activity and say if you wanted to run that seismic line, they could only work, say, 6 hours out of the day or 8 hours. You'd have to leave enough time to allow the animals to transit around.
And when the area is finished, will they come back?
If there was a line and you moved them a kilometer down the ridge, in general, yeah, they would just return. And I don't see that those kinds of disturbances are anything unusual.
The basic idea is that we use the environmental consultants to find out the environmental sensitivities and then design the line according to those sensitivities. And if the mitigation measures cannot be applied, I mean, if in spite of all the mitigation measures, we cannot shoot there. We don't shoot there. We just miss the line.
It's rained quite a lot since the last time we were in here. You can see it's gone all crusty underfoot. But just over here, there's what looks like it's a little water hole that's used by maybe domestic animals and.
Throughout this research period, Premier Oil are particularly keen to establish contact with local people to learn about their views on the environmental issues.
This watering hole here on the southern edge of the national park has been shown to us by the people that run the national park, and it is apparently an area where wildlife come to water, particularly in the dry season. It's clearly an area where we would not want to shoot seismic lines for that reason.
He's saying that right now the wildlife is not coming to this area to drink water, but from the month of April, when there'll be more rains, the water will be more here, and then there'll be lack of water on the other side, and the wildlife will start coming here to drink water. So what we do is we have decided not to shoot any seismic in this area so that the area is not disturbed.
The environmental work progresses outside the park boundaries, and the consultants continue their field surveys. For gas exploration to be legal inside the park, the government must be convinced that Premier Oil's activities can make a positive contribution to the park and its environment.
Premier Oil will not break the law. The law, as it's written at the moment, says that the Sindh government needs to take a position on the law to allow us to do what we would like to do. The EIA will study the situation, and then the Sindh government will decide what it wants to do based on that information. If the EIA is rejected, we will not work in the park. So it will be at the request of the government that we continue this work.
If the government give their approval and Premier Oil can continue their work, then eventually exploration wells will be sunk to search for commercially viable gas reserves. The company has long experience of drilling wells in environmentally sensitive areas, using small-scale operations which reduce the impact of this work. It would even be possible to use a technique known as deviated drilling, so that the well could be sited outside sensitive areas, sending the drilling line at an angle into the gas reservoirs. But if Premier Oil is allowed to explore for gas, what guarantees do the people of Pakistan have that the company will continue to behave in a responsible manner?
We have been proposing to all the departments, to the NGOs, let's make a team of monitors. Let's make a team of monitors that will comprise of the people from NGOs, from the Sindh Wildlife Department, from all the pressure groups, and come and monitor the operations of the Premier. So we are not saying that we will start working in the park and nobody will come and monitor us. What we are saying is that we want to implement a complete monitoring program. This is I think this is the answer to your question, that we are not going to run away after that. We are ready to be monitored.
कि प्रीमियर ने पहले हमारी इस चीज़ का ख्याल रखा कि यहाँ जानवर जो है वो कीमती सरमाया है, वो किसी सूरत में भी डिस्टर्ब ना हो। हम अपने काम को रोकेंगे, हम अपनी लाइन को ड्रॉप करेंगे, लेकिन हम इस चीज़ को डिस्टर्ब नहीं करेंगे। तो इस हिसाब में हम प्रीमियर से ज़्यादा खुश हैं, हमें उनसे ज़्यादा खुशी है उसके इस ताउन की।
I think the story that we are trying to aspire to is a story of Premier Oil working with the Sindh Wildlife, working with all of the NGOs firstly to understand what is the impact of our work. If the impact of our work is acceptable, to carry out work in the area, to find gas which will benefit the economy, and also to make investments in the park to make it a world-class park. My vision is to have it as a fully functioning national park where the wildlife is safe from poachers, and that the government of Pakistan, the Sindh provincial government, the Sindh Wildlife, can say, yes, we were involved with this project, we influenced the oil company, and we have got a world-class project. And I think that is something tremendous to aspire to.